And my wife just had that intuition to put it into park and set the brake while we're waiting on the afternoon rush hour traffic going straight across in front of us. If we hadn't, we'd have been smashed right out in the middle and probably broadsided and would have probably killed us both. So there's reasons for me still to be alive.
I wonder about those Manchurian type candidate things. I was sitting in I was putting on a conference, and I was sitting in traffic in Golden Gate Bridge, and this Manchurian candidate type guy just came up behind us, going 65, rear-ended us, and I was in agony for a couple of years until I finally figured out how to get my body out of agony, because everything was broken in my back and twisted up and stuff like that. So
my wife's still suffering.
So anyway.
Well, we're both still suffering from it, but making progress. Hopefully, that we'll fully recover in a period of time. At least we're doing well enough that we can get out and do the job. So anyway, that's how I came in contact with Bill Tompkins, and a little bit more on some of the scientists and engineers that I worked with there at the Johnston Space Center, and even at Cape Canaveral and Cape Kennedy, of course, the same place. And then the whole business of going to work for the Boeing company and out in Seattle and moving family out there, and that's where I met my wife 37 years ago, and happily married ever since. So.
That's good. That's good. Not everybody can say happily married. That many years.
Not everybody is, but it's nice to find out that we actually knew each other past lives. And when you figure she was from northern Canada and I really came from Texas, and we met in Seattle, Washington, what are the chances of probability of that happening, unless it was designed? So we'll accept it.
Well, I have a theory that a lot of these things are orchestrated. That's part of my theory. That there's so many, and that was explored in Whitley Strieber's book called Majestic. He was hinting that the ETs or somebody wants us to meet, so they orchestrate these things. So maybe on some level, the three of us have all met because of some.
You took the words right out of my mouth. For some reason, we were destined and designed to meet each other. So, and the places where we've met are rather strange too. So there's a lot of selections going on by ETs and or deities that are getting us to the right place at the right time with the right stuff, so we can get things to happen the way they want it to happen. I feel
you're
okay
kind
with
of
that.
Quiet. And then you mentioned somebody from NASA that TJ knows. Who's that guy from NASA that Chris Kraft, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, TJ. You know Chris, right?
Well,
TJ?
not intimately.
I mean,
but
you know
he was
him,
in charge,
met him?
Flight director. Chris Kraft, I met a lot of people.
I was at the same party. I was at the same party you were in, so careful what you say.
well,
this was before I met TJ. Apparently, you met your first husband was.
Yeah, my husband.
Chris.
My first husband was hired by NASA, but Chris Kraft had to sign off on his papers because he had 5 scholarships, and we had just got married and had a baby. We'd done our clearance papers and everything, but it was some kind of rush to get him from going because he had gone down to the military enlisted, what is it, MEPS? What is that, process service or something, MEPS, down in Houston, downtown. And I've been there too, but at that time he was having to join because they had the draft during the 60s, and we had the Vietnam War coming up, the police action really. And so Chris Kraft signed off, and he became the supervisor of the typing pool for NASA during the Apollo missions, I think 7 to 11, or anyway, whatever they were from 67, 68, on up to when they gave the slips for Grumman. But he still got to work for NASA. But now Tompkins worked for TRW, and my neighbors worked for TRW. So Janet,
you know what TRW stands for? You know what TRW stands for?
No.
Thompson, Rommel, Goldrich. Yeah, the three of the actually I think got back to the old Germans and their space program. That's where TRW originally got its name. It's too complex to remember it, and we just shortened it up to TRW, and we lived it with that. So, anyway,
did you work for TRW and Grumman? I didn't know you worked for. Do I know you worked for TRW too?
Yes, I did. Because the way they had the whole space program set up, I can look back at it and say that's how they were able to maintain secrecy, is because about every 3 years, every contract's one year and a different year, but the contracts would be cut, and we would would get reassignments, and we would either lose our jobs or have to go someplace else. And once we landed on the moon, who was that? The president? Well, anyway, the director of the whole space program says, it was Nixon. He said, we're no longer doing a research and development. We're doing routine flights to the moon. And the companies had to cut back. There were 30,000 employees just for Grumman itself, scattered all over the United States, because we were in the race with Russia to get to the moon and get back the quickest and safest. And once we had accomplished that goal, some people figured we shouldn't be spending all that money to go to the moon. And it lost its thrill and its excitement, and they cut back so far that it's a miracle that that's why each time they would have a cutback, I would wind up going to a different company. And then I came back from going into doing the business by myself. I came back and worked for TRW, and I've been with Brown Northrop and Grumman and Boeing. So, and that was only in 14 years that I was with there. So there was no retirement coming out of NASA and the government. That's when I left and went to Seattle and stayed with one company long enough to get a retirement. Not much, mind you, now that we have all this inflation, but it's better than nothing. So, anything else on that question?
Well, you said TRW, so initial 1984, there was a welder named Charles Thompson to making engine valves, but later on, it said Charles Thompson. I've looked at the TRW Thompson products, so that I guess that's what you're saying. Thompson Motor Products.
Thompson,
not Tompkins, but Thompson.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thompson with a P.
Yeah, Thompson. Woolwich. Anyway, none of us could pronounce it clearly enough, so we just put TRW. It worked.
Well, they started working with the Hughes Corporation. Now, they had the ICBM, and I think that's how they got involved in the Atlas, the Gemini missions, where, we had a lot of TRW people living next to me, and I knew them coming and going out of NASA. So this is something we can get into in this part of the show, is how these different people, civilian contractors, astronauts, and then those that work for NASA. My husband worked directly for NASA over the typing pool, and that's why I got to hear things. And he called me up. I got to go around NASA, but I got to know a lot of people, Janet, because I had relatives that had me go to White Sands and worked at Los Alamos, and they were very curious because I had a couple of uncles come and go from the NASA there, and my husband's father worked for Grumman, the same one that Ken worked for, right, Ken? Now, did you say you did work for TRW and Grumman?
Yes.
Or tell me.
No, started off working for Grumman in 1966, and then after 3 years there, I went to work for the BRN, and that was at the Lunar Receiving Laboratory. Then after that, I went to work for. I'd have to get out my
Space Technology Laboratories. Well, I know you went to Bethpage, but did you work anything with the JPL or Jet Propulsion Laboratories at all, JPL?
Only, not directly for JPL, but they, of course, they had their people come to just about every other meetings going on with the other aerospace corporations. But the thing, like I was pointing out, that we got, after 3 years, we'd get laid off, and that's how they maintained secrecy, because we had secret clearances. We weren't allowed to talk to anybody outside of those that were authorized. And then by switching us from what there. I would come across things that looked like we had some kind of a secret spacecraft business going on. In fact, a friend of mine, we stumbled into one of the, I think it was Building 27, now that I think about it, and there was a small 2-man spacecraft that was in the high bay, and we tried to find out a little information about that, and then it got all hush-hush. That's the whole thing, though, is, you know, you something happens, you get transferred to another company, and then you want to try to find out. But we were pushed and moving so fast to be sure that we beat Russia to the moon and back that by the time we found out, we were all laid off and we didn't have access to all the information that was kept secret. Anyway,
well, TRW got bought by Northrop Grumman. So did you work? They acquired it in 2002. But you remember when it was TRW, Northrop Grumman, and my mother worked for Geospace Aerospace Corp. And a lot of this has to do with parts and also the developing efforts and system engineers and people developing. But TRW led our help with the Titan missile and for the Gemini missions, right? And then the company served for the Air Force engineers.
See, I worked for Grumman from 1980 to 1998. So I finally was able to say this one company.
Years.
Well, right at it. Yep. That's the only reason I got any kind of retirement at all. So many of the people. That's when, once we finished the moon race, a lot of the best scientists in the world that helped us get there, there weren't any jobs. There were PhD scientists walking, selling newspapers on the streets in Houston, and we all had not. We would try to find a job in another company not involved in the space program because it was exciting. We were part of it. We got the job done. We got back safely. But then again, if you're getting laid off and having to go to another company, you lose your retirements and stuff. So it was not a fun time to be out walking the streets looking for making enough income to feed the families. So that's why I left and went to Seattle.
Well, that's why I think so many of us, we excuse me, our heart, it was such a time like the Jetsons, we had these high thoughts of the future and the way it should be, and it's like somebody messed with the timeline for the space shuttle and the International Space Station. We got behind like 50 years, but now some people blame it on the fact that we were in a war, the Vietnam War, and Kennedy that said we were going, he got killed 63, but we still made it in 67, 8, but Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong got most of the
glory.
Credit. But now, you remember, then, who was it? Frank Borman. Now, who did Frank work for? Was that Grumman? He was the spokesperson? You remember Frank Borman?
I remember Frank Borman, yeah. But I don't remember who he worked for.
I think he was Grumman Space. But anyway, NASA folks, there was a NASA Langley, and there was things taken to Roswell, and Janet and I were talking about that in Hughes Space Corp. So we're going to do some research and discuss all this because it goes back to Roswell, and before that, Washington, the state, and how we're bringing it all together with the Allied Command and then various people that have various realities. And we've been talking about the Allied Command bringing it together in the Space Force that's coming up in 2020 and going to Mars as well. So we've got visiting space now as a reality, and a lot of people don't recognize or really study it. And they got tired of the NASA. It gets sort of boring. And we're going to try to figure out how, as civilians, especially because our heart was in the right place, and we were in NASA, we were at Houston, and I happened to work actually across the street at the Nassau Bay National Bank, where I met various people. Alan Bean with the black, it was a gold Corvette with black bat wings, but anyway, they got Corvettes, and we talked about that with Gillette, right? The gentleman.
And they had, depending on their position with the command module, either a CDR, that would be the commander, the LMP would be the lunar module pilot, and the Corvette company, they put those labels on the side of the the fancy little sports cars